Well, I just got out of theater watching Return to Silent Hill, the live action adaptation of Silent Hill 2, a PlayStation 2 game from 2001, which also had a remake from Bluebird Team in 2024. Silent Hill 2 does not need much of an introduction, of course. The Silent Hill fans know it already, and it's also a very popular and famous game in the horror game scene. It's one of the most revolutionary and one of the most tragic games when it comes to the horror scene, and maybe when it comes to video game history overall. Now, as a big Silent Hill fan, of course I had to watch this movie. I watched the first Silent Hill movie in 2006, which was a live action adaptation of Silent Hill 1. I watched Silent Hill Revelation in 2012, which was a live action adaptation of Silent Hill 3, and basically a direct sequel to the first movie, just like Silent Hill 3 was a direct sequel to the first game. And of course, now I also had to watch this movie. As a matter of fact, this was my second time watching the movie. And to quickly answer the question, well, what did I think of the movie? Many people would probably now assume that I would go on a rant as a Silent Hill fan and say how shitty this movie was, how disappointing and dissatisfying this movie was, that it was not faithful at all, and it's true, it was not faithful to the game at all. If you want a modern and faithful adaptation of Silent Hill 2, you have to go for the remake. Now, of course, the remake is not a movie, but that's the most faithful and modern version of Silent Hill 2 that we're gonna get and probably will ever get. However, what I personally have to say about Return to Silent Hill is, and I know that this is gonna be a very, very unpopular opinion, I can understand that people are very dissatisfied with this movie, and I also think it's not a great movie. Maybe it's not even a good movie. When it comes to that, I have to think about it a few more weeks, probably, to flesh out my opinion about it. But I thought it was at least okay. It was a very different interpretation of Silent Hill 2, and I cannot really blame Christoph Gans for that. Because, first of all, the other two Silent Hill movies were also not faithful to their respective games at all. Not even Silent Hill 1. And Silent Hill 1 was very popular when it comes to adaptations based on games. And I'm not even talking about stuff like Red Pyramid Thing being in the movie and Lying Figures being in the movie and Bubblehead Nurses or Radha Mitchell being the lead instead of Sean Bean, who would later portray Harry Mason and everything. Also, in terms of the plot of Silent Hill 1, the movie was also just very loosely based on Silent Hill 1. And Silent Hill Revelation was very unpopular, but the thing is, I liked Silent Hill Revelation. I do not like Silent Hill 3 at all. I liked Adelaide Clemens as Heather. I also had no problem with Roberto Campanella coming back as Pyramid Head, just like he was there for the first movie. I have no problem with Pyramid Head in other Silent Hill products, such as the movies or, in Silent Hill Homecoming he's also there, but he's called the Boogeyman there and has a completely different definition, and that's the whole thing. I have no problem with different creators for different products having different definitions for something, especially in regards to creatures like Pyramid Head, for example. Because to this day, and that's something that of course, many people will always be mad about. Pyramid Head is still not correctly understood by many fans. To this day, this almost quarter of a century old fan theory that Pyramid Head is the embodiment of James's guilt because people read it from a Silent Hill wiki or from YouTube videos or whatever, started to believe it and then spread this theory, spread this rumor, so much to the extent that even Masahiro Ito, the original creature designer for Pyramid Head, had to come out on his own Twitter many years ago and tell people that's not what Pyramid Head actually means. Just as people always misunderstood the infamous Silent Hill 2 kitchen scene with Pyramid Head, where Ito-san also said, no, that's not what I meant with that scene. But I'm not going to elaborate on that. Anyway, the thing is, as you can see, I do not have problems with different definitions of an idea when it's a completely different product. And the Silent Hill movie universe is not the same as the game universe anyway. So I have no problem with Pyramid Head being Alessa's guardian in the first two movies. It was cool to see him. I don't mind that. It doesn't take away his meaning for a manifestation for James in his own original game, and also not for the remake. And as a matter of fact, it was quite weird seeing Pyramid Head in this movie because, of course, that's the one particular appearance where you sort of have to make it count. And Pyramid Head in this movie was sort of weird. Now, I do not have a problem with him that much, just as I said, because it's a movie, it's fine to redefine that. So if Christoph Gans decided to take some creative liberties to have some discrepancies between the movie verse and the game verse, that's completely fine. But I am not entirely sure in regards to certain things that were in this movie, whether or not he did that because he purposely wanted to be different, or because he looked up some stuff on the internet that was popular and then maybe believed it to be true. Which is kind of funny that many fans even hated this movie for certain differences in comparison to the game, because many things actually were in this movie that are not true in the game, but are still to this day believed by many fans. But that's a different story. As a matter of fact, I have listened to many people in the theater talk about the game differences while watching the movie 2 times, which of course is a completely different issue because many people probably have already experienced certain events of going to theater and then being annoyed by somebody next to them talking over the movie experience itself. Yeah, but let's not talk about that. Of course, that's a different story for a different time. In any way, just what I wanted to say was, yes, the movie is different. Pyramid Head in this movie is James under his Pyramid Head, which was a popular fan theory back in the day, even though the truth is, creatively, that Pyramid Head has no face. He's like Valtiel from Silent Hill 3. That's canonical. Just like many people always believed Laura was a manifestation or a part of Mary. That's also not true. In this movie, it's true. In this movie, even Angela is. Even though Angela is a completely separate character, just like Laura in the games. Just like Eddie. They're completely different people. But I don't really have a problem with Angela and Laura being a representation of a certain part of Mary in this movie, because I said it's a vastly different interpretation of the story, and I think it's fine for a movie that tries to tie everything neatly together to sort of streamline it a bit more. Because Angela and Eddie also appears for a very brief time in this movie, they had their own little side story in the game, their own little reason, their own traumas, which led them to Silent Hill. And bringing it in like that for such a short movie would have probably distracted the audience from the main narrative. So I think having Angela as part of Mary and the whole trauma around Angela also being a part of Mary, as well as Laura being a part of Mary, is fine for what this movie was trying to tell. Now, this movie also tried to introduce a different cult that was not the same cult as from the first movie. And they also tried to bring in sort of a twist in that regard, so they could explain how James met Mary and how Mary ultimately got sick and everything. I think that was not that great, and it ultimately hurt the movie more than it could actually bear, because that was a big alteration. I understood why they did it. I understood why Christoph Gans did it, but it did not really work that well for me. Now, in regards to the whole Mary and Angela thing, I'm very, very much surprised that they incorporated Abstract Daddy, especially as the manifest of Abstract Daddy is Abstract Daddy, because it's a very abstract depiction of a very, very traumatic, very terrible event in the game, or in the past of the game. And he still was sort of abstract in this movie, but it definitely was the most graphic version out there. They even brought in the infamous room in which you would meet Abstract Daddy. So that was very bold. I can understand that certain stuff like the Toluca prison was not in there, or Eddie with his whole storyline or side storyline, so to speak, and the meat freezer and everything. That's fine. And I understand, based on how people would already lose their shit in regards to any difference when compared to the game, that they at least had to try and bring in certain elements from the game. But bringing in Abstract Daddy was, yeah, it was bold. It was bold, and especially in the way they did it. I mean, it didn't have much screen time, but they tried to incorporate it into the whole Mary storyline. And it sort of made sense for the kind of story that this movie was trying to tell. But it was still as tragic and extreme and terrible as it was in the original game. Now, many people, of course, also did not like the fact that stuff like the flash lips were excluded from this movie. Instead, they had what was supposed to be the final boss in the game, which also then appeared at the end of the movie, appear in the same room that would be the boss room in the Brookhaven Asylum in the game. I think that's perfectly fine. I did not really expect them to bring in those weird frames from the movie with those sacks of flesh and dangling feet and lips that were supposed to stand for the female genital. Now, in regards to the depiction of the final boss, or, well, the Mary manifest when it comes to that, just like a certain spider creature that was also original for this movie, that was one of the things in the movie where I thought, wow, that looked really cheap and not something from 2026 or 2025, maybe from 2010. Yeah, and it reminded me a lot of a way worse looking version of Vecna from Stranger Things. If you have a full look on that creature at the end of the movie, you will see that it sort of tries to resemble a moth, which also ties into the whole moth theme that, is dragged through the entirety of the movie, which is also something that is in the final battle of the original game and that is in the apartment section of the original game, which also appears in this movie. But yeah, I wasn't really a fan of that design. Now, one thing that surprised me very much was I thought that Christoph Gans would have gone for this whole time loop theory thing that fans conjured up when the remake came out, which is wrong. And I thought that he was a fan of that because of the way the movie ended. And then, now that I've watched this movie a second time, I had to come to the realization that I misunderstood that. That was not what the movie was trying to tell. Even though I cannot blame anyone being confused by this movie because it's very sloppily narrated. There are many cuts back and forth, many flashbacks and shifts of environment, and I'm not just talking about the shifts from Fogworld to Otherworld. Christoph Gans also did many shifts in his first movie, in his first Silent Hill movie, but here he over exaggerates it. And the whole way the movie is narrated is very, very confusing. And Silent Hill 2 already is a kind of confusing story, but this movie, for the way it tried to tell the story in a different way, it was even more unnecessarily confusing. And there were a lot of people sitting next to me that ultimately stood up when the movie ended and were like, oh my god, this was one of the worst things that I've ever seen. Oh my god, this was such a shitty movie. Yeah, I mean, it's perfectly fine if they think that. It's perfectly fine if you, who are apparently watching this review for some reason, think that. It's perfectly fine if you think, well, I wanted a more faithful adaptation and I am dissatisfied that it wasn't. But it always comes down to, well, what was the reason? Was it because this movie was sloppily edited? Was it simply because there were not enough references? Was it because of misinterpretations from the director's side, or interpretations that you had that maybe weren't even true in regards to the game, as I pointed out earlier? Or was it because of the CGI, or simply because this movie was kind of a mess? Which it was. I have to admit that. I think the movie is okay. It has some charm, but it was a mess, definitely. And many people who thought this movie was not good, and who I had to overhear some conversations of in the theater, they were talking about differences between the movie and the game. And I noticed that many of them did not even know how many movies there were, or that they did not understand certain things about the movie, or they tried to simply have some sort of a soft rant about the differences between movie and game. Of course, I did not want to listen to everything they said because, first of all, it's none of my business, and second of all, I always try to not get too negatively influenced by the opinions of others, or positively influenced, but sometimes you cannot help it. But many people also disliked Silent Hill Revelation, and I do like this movie. But one thing from one guy I could not help but kind of smile about, and it certainly was not his fault, but he tried to argue with his, I think it was his girlfriend, after the movie ended. He said, "Oh my God, this made no sense. The guy, he got into town without his car. Why was his car with him at the end?" It was like, you see, that's the thing. You did not even understand what was going on in this movie, and that's, to an extent, it's certainly not his fault, because this movie was a narrative mess. But And this is the greatest difference between the movie and the game. Many people over the last 25 years always argued about the reality of Silent Hill. And many say, oh, this is a subconscious manifestation and this is not real and that is not real. Well, James very much in the game is in Silent Hill. And thus, everything that he meets is also not a hallucination. Those manifests, those, as people always call them, subconscious manifestations, they are corporeal. They are bound to Silent Hill. And not everybody can perceive them, just like Laura, for example, cannot perceive them, but they are very much real. And they can bleed into the experience of somebody else, just like James could meet Angela's abstract daddy. And this movie is vastly different in that regard because James, and that's something that apparently many people did not understand, and even I, so I'm not trying to elevate myself here, even I did not really understand it the first time I watched this movie. James was not returning to Silent Hill in this movie. He woke up in hospital and a nurse told him, "You're in Silent Hill." And the psychiatrist came in and said, "Mary's long gone. She's dead." And because of those sudden shifts back and forth and the way they tried to tell this story and this constant, oh, it's not real and everything, which is something that you just very often hear when talking about Silent Hill, I did not fully understand what was going on. But James was not in the fog world or in the other world at all, which is completely different from Christoph Gans's version in his Silent Hill 1 movie, because there Radha Mitchell was in the fog world and she was in the other world, but there it actually literally was in James's head. And what I first misunderstood to be an adaptation of this whole time loop theory at the end, where Christoph Gans tried to depict James going for the in water ending, which many people understand as the canonical ending for the game's story. Right after that, basically the movie restarts and we go back to James meeting Mary. And that's where I was, after the movie ended for the first time, was very pissed and said, oh no, did he really go for the time loop theory? And no, he didn't go for the time loop theory. It's just that he really literally meant what was said in this movie. What James lived through was literally not real. He was in Silent Hill, but he was always in Silent Hill. He was in the Brookhaven Asylum, and he was trying to cope with this whole deal. He was trying to cope that he lost Mary. He did not actually go to Silent Hill and fight those monsters like it was very much in the game's story. All that in this movie interpretation actually was just symbolic. And that's also why this whole time loop thing did not apply here, because the ending, after James basically committed suicide with the in water ending, was not everything literally resetting, because you then can hear the nurse or the psychiatrist ask, "Mr. Sunderland, are you awake?" And it's very clear that he's still in the asylum and that he simply chooses to still dream and go for a more pleasant outcome of trying to remember his life with Mary, which is why we see them restart and him, instead of returning to Silent Hill with her, actually turning around and drive away. So in that regard, I have to say, well, there's a lot of differences in direct comparison to the game. There's a lot of references in direct comparison to the game. Would I have been happy with a more faithful adaptation? Yes, I definitely would have been more happy. I think they should have gotten a different actor than Jeremy Irvine, but during the movie, I did not mind him that much. I also sort of liked, or not just sort of, I did like the actress for Mary, who also portrayed Maria and Angela in this movie. And I liked that Laura's actress was the same as the one from the Silent Hill 2 remake. And really, all I have to say when it comes to this movie, I think that maybe people are judging this movie a bit too harshly. Because, yes, of course, you could go on a rant about how bad this movie was, how this movie was not faithful at all, even though, if you really think about it, it still kind of was. Because it was about a man trying to deal with the loss of the love of his life. He was not married to Mary in this movie. Mary and James, they lived in Silent Hill in this version for a while. Yes, Angela and also Laura were there as a symbolic depiction of a part of Mary. Of course, there were all those differences, but there also were some bits and pieces and some narrative beats that were in this movie, and he clearly could not live with the fact that he had to let Mary go and that he even was the one who did it. I think simply for a movie adaptation that was trying something different, it was fine. Yeah. I'm more worried about, just as I mentioned before, about the thought of whether Christoph Gans brought in those differences because he actually wanted to make it different or because he simply read some stuff online about Silent Hill 2. That is something that I will probably always be worried about when rewatching this movie. But I think this movie is definitely worth a watch if you can give this movie some leeway, if you can accept that it is different, that it doesn't have the most greatest CGI effects, and is also narratively somewhat confused. I think you will get at least some entertainment value out of it. But if not, then that's also okay. For me personally, it was enough. Anyway, thank you for watching.